Chapter 1 of How Bessie Kept House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Elsie Selwyn. How Bessie Kept House by Amanda Minnie Douglas. Chapter 1. Bessie's Ambition. "Oh, I know I could, Mother. Please do let me. And above all, I should not feel afraid without Cousin Jane, for there will be Dick and Father at night." Bessie's face was very eager and her eyes so imploring that her mother smiled. "Cousin Jane has been so poorly with rheumatism that I hate to ask her, but she could sit still and tell you what was best." That was just what Bessie did not want. She hated to be ordered round, as she expressed it, and Cousin Jane was a firm believer in Satan finding mischief for idle hands. No hands that she could keep busy were ever allowed to be idle, so Bessie quickly interrupted her mother with, "There isn't much to tell. I help you do the work every day and know as well as Cousin Jane. And it will be only such a little while. I'd so much rather be alone." "What does Father say?" Mr. Collins glanced up from his paper and looked at his wife and his little daughter of 12. "Why, I don't see but that Bessie can do well enough if she does not go off to play and forget my dinner." "Oh, I will not. I will be careful not to forget a single thing. There are the children. I'll take Jamie in the field with me. And I, Shirley, can take care of Freddie." "If you will be careful, Bessie, but you are so heedless." Bessie flushed at this. She had a fancy that her mother did not at all appreciate her. She was as bright and smart as other girls she knew, and it would be just lovely to have 2 or 3 days to herself to do quite as she liked, by which you will know that Bessie was very fond of having her own way. However, it was settled before Bessie went to bed. No one was to be asked to come. She would have the whole house to herself and must try to do her best. She could hardly get asleep for thinking of it. She would have the Lewis girls over one afternoon, and they would have such fun. If she only dared ask Carrie Lanham, who was so very funny, but her mother had refused her permission to go to Carrie's house, and had said that she did not approve of such a companion. But Bessie went to school with her, and if she was good enough to go to school and to Sunday school, why, she couldn't be so very bad. And not to have to sew any, and to do the work when she liked. Oh, it would be just splendid. So the next morning Mrs. Collins kissed her and said goodbye, taking Lottie the baby with her, to make a short visit to the next town where Grandmother Collins was ill. The train went at 9. Mrs. Collins was up early and had the breakfast table all out of the way, the chambers put in order, and left only the shed for Bessie to clean up after she was gone. "Be sure and make your dinner ready by 12, said her mother, "and don't go off anywhere, Bessie. On Friday at 5 I shall be back, so be a good little daughter." Jamie went over to the station to carry his mother's bag. Freddie took his blocks to the shady corner of the porch, and Bessie went to the shed, as they called their rough summer kitchen, because they piled their wood in it during the winter, and kept various articles of provision in it, though they only used it for washing then. There were the breakfast knives to scour, the place to sweep up, beans to shell for dinner, and 3 hours to do it in. She stood in the doorway for several moments, looking out over the distant fields. "I don't believe I will scour the knives this morning," she said presently. "We will only need 3 more at dinner, and I can do it all then under the one fuss. And I'll just brush up the kitchen. I shall have to give it a good sweeping after dinner. 11 will be early enough to begin at the beans. If I kept house, I should not work every moment of the time, I know. When I am married—" Bessie fell into a brown study there, and out of the chaos of thought came a bright idea. There was a book up in Dick's room that she wanted to read. She had stolen a few pages of it already. She did not even pause to brush up the kitchen, but ran upstairs. The room was in perfect order. On his table lay a Bible, a familiar science, and a tourist's guide. Dick had a mean way of hiding his nice storybooks, and Mamma approved of it. When she was a young lady, she would read everything that she wanted to. Patchwork and crocheting were foolish things and a great waste of time nowadays. Mrs. Alwyn said so the other day. And mending and all that, Bessie had a little twinge of conscience there. Her stocking darning for the week was not done, because she went out to tea yesterday. But then, there is plenty of time, she said to herself. So Bessie began to hunt around. 3 bureau drawers were searched with no result, but the 4th was locked. She found her mother's bunch of keys, but none of them would fit. Her own little trunk key? But no. There was something in the drawer, of course, the book she wanted, and maybe others. Then a bright thought came into her mind. Take out the drawer above it, to be sure. It was quite heavy, and her arms were not very strong, so it came down with a crash, tumbling out the clothes and a bottle of something that, fortunately, did not break. Yes, there was the very book. She seized it eagerly, found her place, sat down by the window, and forgot all else. When you are older and have more judgment, you may read some of these works, her mother had said, but at present excessive reading is a bad habit, and I do not want your mind taken away from your studies. There are other reasons, too, that you will understand as you grow older. End of Chapter 1. Read by Elsie Selwyn. Chapter 2 of How Bessie Kept House by Amanda Minnie Douglas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Elsie Selwyn. Chapter 2, Bessie's Troubles Begin. It was vacation now, so her mother's restrictions could not hold good. She read on until Freddie came trudging upstairs crying, Bessie, Bessie, I'm so hungry. I want a biscuit. Oh, you've broken Dick's bureau. Bessie started in guilty affright and let her book fall. Go right downstairs, Fred, right away, stamping her foot. But you've broken the bureau. No, I haven't. Then, recovering from her fright, she said with a laugh, I was only fixing Dick's clothes. Come down with sister, and she will give you a nice piece of cake. Bessie knew by experience that to beg Freddie not to tell was the surest way to make him, and though she did not feel in a very pleasant humor, she wanted to lead him to forget the incident, or if he did mention it, to have him do so in no suspicious manner. Will you have a piece of this nice gingerbread? Or a biscuit? Oh, Freddie, what have you been doing? Making a fire there on the floor, you bad, wicked boy. Why, you might have set the house on fire. I have a good mind not to give you anything. It was only a little bonfire, whimpered Freddie. It fell off the stove hearth and burned, and I couldn't pick it up. There was a scorched spot on the floor that Mother's sharp eyes would be sure to detect. Oh, dear. She scolded Freddie soundly. He cried, and she gave him a piece of cake to pacify him, swept up the fragments, and lifted the stove lid. The fire was out. Just then the clock struck 11. First of all, she must go upstairs and put Dick's bureau in order. If she only dared to take the book out. Would he look at dinner time? She stood and considered, read another page, and then hurriedly thrust the book back into its place, took up the drawer, and began to push it in. But alas, it seemed a world too big. If one corner went in, the other wouldn't. If the bottom went in, the top caught. She pinched her fingers, scraped her knuckles, cried a little, and at last, by accident, hit the fortunate medium. The clothes were tumbled in. Which corner held the bottle? For the life of her she could not tell, so she put it in at a venture and ran downstairs. 11:30, and no fire, no beans shelled, no potatoes ready. She let down the coal and put in some dry wood, set the tea kettle over, washed her potatoes, burned 2 fingers in her haste, then went at arranging the table. I don't believe Father knew about the beans, putting them out of sight. There is cold meat and pie, and it will do well enough. Oh dear, my poor fingers. Father and Jamie came in at 12:15. Dick, who was in a store, 5 minutes later. She had managed to wash Freddie, and he had begged her not to tell about the fire because he meant to be so very good all day long. But she was flurried, and her hand pained, and altogether she felt like crying. Well, little housekeeper, exclaimed Dick cheerily, your table looks as nice as a new pin. There's one white mark for you. I am to keep account, you know. Bessie flushed uneasily. She wasn't bad or deceitful by nature, or rather, I should say not persistently, and now her conscience smote her because she knew she did not deserve a white mark. I want to stay home this afternoon, declared Jamie. I am going to make my pigeon coop. You had better come with me, and I'll do it this evening. You might bring a basket and gather some nice wild grapes. said his father. "Can't I go too?" asked Freddie. "I'm tired of being all alone." "No, you stay with your sister this afternoon. Tomorrow I will take you and Jamie riding as far as the stone bridge, if you are good boys." That settled the matter happily. "Oh, Bessie," her father said presently, "I picked some limas this morning for dinner. I suppose your mother forgot to speak of it. You might cook them for tea, they are coming on so fast." "Well, I will hunt them up," she said with a little flush. She was very glad to get them all out of the way. Freddie lay on the lounge with his picture book in his hand, and she knew he would soon drop asleep. She ran upstairs to take another glance at Dick's drawer. It did look tumbled, so she straightened out the articles, placed them in little piles, and left it neat enough, hoping that Dick would not notice any little change. Then she took her dishes out to the shed sink, cleared up the dining room, brushed out the flies, and went to dishwashing. Oh, here was her breakfast knives all rusted. Someone had dropped water over them, and now the scouring would be twice as hard. The hot water made her scraped fingers smart, and Bessie really could not help crying. After the work was done, she shelled her beans, tried to scrub out the burnt spot on the floor, and found it past 3 o'clock. Freddie woke up then and went out on the porch. She tied up her 4 fingers with some cooling ointment, brushed her hair, and changed her dress, when Addie Strong came in. "I want you to come over to our house to tea tomorrow," she said. "My 2 cousins from Newton are to spend the day. Gracie plays so beautifully, you know, and you are so fond of music. I shall not ask anyone else." "And I can't come, it is too bad. Oh dear!" And she had half a mind to send for Cousin Jane, cross old thing that she was. And maybe she wouldn't let her go. Cousin Jane thought so much liberty was the ruin of children nowadays. No, she could not go. That was all about it. Addie was very sorry, and Bessie could have cried, but there was no help for it. She walked a short distance down the street with her, and paused at the gate to speak to Sophie Lewis. Could they not come over a little while tomorrow afternoon? Of course they would, and if Mrs. Collins was away, they would have such fun. "What is it? Can't I come too? Don't shut me out of fun," said Carrie Lanham's gay voice. "If you like," said Bessie, thinking that she really could not help asking her, and rather glad that it had so happened. "We'll have a regular frolic in the barn. Your barn is such a nice, clean place." When she reached home, she found that Freddie had been digging dirt out of the path and carrying it up on the porch, where, with a cup of water, he was making pies. "Oh, Freddie, you bad boy! Mother has forbidden you to bring sand up on the porch. Look at your clean apron! Oh, you disobedient, aggravating— There, take that and clear out with your blocks." She gave him a hard slap in her vexation. "I'll tell Mother, you see." And Freddie cried more with anger than pain. "I won't pick up a single block, you ugly old thing." "You deserve a good whipping, that's what you do." And for a moment Bessie would have been delighted to administer it, but Mrs. Collins had forbid the elder children to strike the younger ones, no matter what the provocation might be. So Bessie swept the porch and then wiped it over with the mop. It was time to make up the fire again. She was cross to Freddie, out of temper, and as a natural result, everything went wrong. Supper was a little late, but so was her father, and Dick never reached home until 7. She went to bed shortly after her work was done, for she was tired and out of spirits. Housekeeping had not been the brilliant success she imagined it. But Freddie was so much trouble. Never mind, tomorrow afternoon he would be gone, and she and the girls could have a good time. Her father had the kettle boiling in the morning before he called her. The smart and ache was out of her fingers, and she felt rested. Everything went smoothly at breakfast, only Dick said, "You need not have taken so much pains setting my drawer aside, Bessie. I had to laugh this morning when I could not find a single thing where I had put it, but I suppose housekeeping was a great treat to you." And he laughed. Bessie flushed. He would never know the rest. But if she could only have the book to read. "If that's a specimen, you'll be splendid, Bessie. Neat enough for an old maid." Bessie turned away to listen to her father. Could she not boil some beets? And he would send in a steak for dinner, and was there anything else? Jamie stayed at home all the morning and helped to amuse Freddie. Bessie attended to her sleeping rooms and then went to the kitchen. After washing the dishes, she concluded to try making some cookies. They would be so good to eat this afternoon when the girls came. She had often helped her mother on baking days, but it was somewhat different to plan everything for herself. Bessie was not quite as wise as she fancied, though she often imagined that she could improve upon her mother's ways. She poured in her milk without any measurement, and then had to use more flour, making twice the quantity of dough that she meant to. She could not remember whether she had put in salt or not, and without thinking to taste, ran for some more. They were rolled out, cut, and placed in the pans. "I'll make a cake for the rest," she said to herself. "I can't bother cutting out so much." She put them in the oven and began to tidy up her kitchen. What a sight of work there was to do after all! Beans to shell, and Dick had asked for mashed potatoes. Oh, her cookies must be done. They were hard and dried, but not the beautiful brown that she was accustomed to see. What could be the matter? There was a good fire. Oh, she had never turned the damper. How could she have forgotten it? Well, she would try the others. As for these, they might as well be cannonballs. She would not say anything about them, but soak them and give them to the chickens. A little flour was of no account. She turned the damper and the rest baked very nicely. Then she put in her cake and was so busy with potatoes, beans, and the dinner table that she never thought to look until her dishes were washed. The cake was a cinder, of course, and the pan would have to be scoured before it met her mother's eyes. But as the girls were coming, she would not do it now. Mr. Collins had taken the 2 boys with him, so Bessie thought she would dress up for her company. There was a pretty lawn dress that her mother was rather choice of, but then, if it did get crumpled, she could iron it out again. To be sure, her calico was clean, but this was the prettiest, and ruffled. She would be very careful. Carrie came first. She was a bright, droll girl who could talk broken Irish and Dutch, and mimicked everyone to the life. She came up to Bessie's room and inspected everything. When Sophie and Mary came, Bessie ran down, leaving them there. "Let us go out in the barn and have a good romp," said Mary. "It is such fun climbing over the hay, and we can do nothing much indoors." "Agreed, I like it much the best," declared Bessie. "Come, Carrie," she called. The visitor ran down presently and said in a breathless way that she had been looking out of every window. There was a great fragrance of cologne about her, and Bessie mistrusted at once that she had been helping herself. They did have a gay time, sure enough. Carrie said and did everything funny, but somehow Bessie did not feel quite at ease. The amusement did not seem to go down to the bottom of her heart and satisfy, and as she was scrambling about, her dress caught on something. Oh, the fearful rent! Just above the ruffle, where it never could be mended, for it was drawn all out of shape. She might have known. Why did she wear it out here to play in the hay? "It's dreadful, isn't it? Will your mother scold? Can't you mend it? Oh, what a dreadful tear!" Their fun was spoiled then. They came down very soberly and returned to the house, looked over some books, and then declared they must go home. Bessie forgot about the cookies that she was going to treat them with. She had a good cry as they went out of the gate. Then she took her dress off and looked at it. No, it never could be mended. The whole breadth, too. If it only had torn anywhere else. Presently a bright thought came into Bessie's head. Her mother had taught her to sew very nicely. Indeed, not being able to keep a servant, Bessie was made her chief assistant. She hunted up her mother's piece bag, and, oh joy! There was a large piece, enough for a new breadth, if she could get it in before her mother's return. She began to rip it out, but, being sewed with a machine, it was slow work. Her father came home, there was supper to get, the boys to wash and put to bed, and then she took a lamp to her room, but ere long her father called to know if she had gone to bed, and why her light was burning. She wiped away a few tears and went to bed. "Who broke my cologne bottle?" asked Dick the next morning. "Jamie, was it your work?" "No, it wasn't. I haven't been in your room." End of chapter 2. Read by Elsie Selwyn. Chapter 3 of How Bessie Kept House by Amanda Minnie Douglas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Elsie Selwyn. Chapter 3. Bessie's Severe Lesson. "It was not you, Bessie? It looks as if someone had hit it to loosen the stopper and broken the neck off. The cologne is nearly all spilled, but the bottle is standing upright, so it could not have been the cat." "What a strange thing. Jamie, don't tell any story about it," said his father sternly. "I didn't, father. I haven't touched it. Please do believe me." "I can guess how it happened," Bessie said in great confusion. "Carrie Lanham called yesterday, and I took her to my room while I was dressing. Then the Lewis girls ran over, and I came down, expecting she would follow. When she did come down, she was very sweet with cologne, but I thought she had been using mine." "I wish you would keep your girls out of my room," said Dick crossly. "I did not know she went there. It was very ill-bred, but Dick, I will give you my bottle," Bessie said in so deprecating a tone that Dick was conquered. Isn't that the girl Mother doesn't like, Bessie? Don't ever ask her here." "No, I will not," Bessie answered. "She cannot be real good, or she would not have done such a thing." Every spare moment of the morning poor Bessie worked upon her dress, but what with the boys and the dinner, there were so many interruptions. As soon as she could get the dishes out of the way, she took her dress over to Mrs. Lewis to ask her to sew up the breadths and stitch the ruffles on. "I'm so glad you could do it," said Bessie. "You are a very ingenious little girl," remarked Mrs. Lewis. "How fortunate that you had some lawn like that. But you ought to have known better than to play in such a delicate dress." Bessie expressed her thanks with a great sense of relief. When she reached home, she ironed it out and hung it in the wardrobe, then finished putting her house in order, and had just time to dress herself and go to meet her mother. How glad Bessie was to see her! Housekeeping had not been so very delightful after all. She was worried and anxious, and seemed to have a load at her heart, and the tears came into her eyes as her mother kissed her. "Grandmother is better, dear, and I have had a nice visit. She wants you to come and stay a week, and I promised you should. Are they all well, and did you keep house nicely? I have thought of you half the time." "Pretty well," Bessie answered soberly. "And there is Father, too, come to meet us. Run on, Lottie, dear, and catch him." Mrs. Collins was escorted to the house in triumphant procession, and Mr. Collins declared that Bessie had been the nicest little housekeeper in the world, and that Mother might go again, but Bessie felt as if she never wanted to be left alone with household cares. When Dick came home to supper, he put a square white parcel on her plate. He was a little sorry for his crossness that morning. "Oh," she cried, "a book! And Little Women! Dear Dick!" "She deserved it, Mother. She has kept house like an old woman, and nothing has been behindhand." Bessie ran out of the room to cry a little. She felt so sorry for the things they could not know, the dreadful things she never should have the courage to confess. But she never would touch Dick's books again without permission. And as for Carrie Lanham— "What is in this jar?" asked her mother, as they were putting away the tea things. "Oh, cookies! Why, I made them yesterday, Mamma, but they're not very good." "Pretty salt," said her mother with a grimace, "but they will do for the children." That evening, Bessie took out the stockings. "So you did not even find time to darn the stockings, Bessie," her mother began merrily. "Yet sometimes you think there cannot be much to do, and during these 3 days there was no washing, ironing, or baking, and no baby to look after, but I dare say you found enough to keep you pretty busy." "I'm afraid I did not improve it in the beginning," Bessie returned gravely, "but I shall never think again that it is so very easy to do." "You succeeded very well," said her mother, "and as a reward you shall have a nice pleasant week at Grandma's. Aunt Lucy will be glad to have you." There was a great lump in Bessie's throat, but she had not the courage to speak, and afternoon came so soon. Her mother laid out her pretty lawn dress, and her father took her to the station and gave her into the conductor's charge. But Bessie's heart was not as light as it should have been for a little girl who was going to make a pleasant visit. Bessie had a delightful visit with her Aunt Lucy. Grandmother was just beginning to sit up a little, and she was a very pleasant old lady to wait upon. She read aloud from an entertaining book, sewed a little, and had one tea party with some neighboring girls. "How much you have improved," her Aunt Lucy would say. "How thoughtful you are! What a help your mother must find you!" Bessie would flush at this praise and feel that she did not deserve it. If she could only make Aunt Lucy stop! I said in the beginning that Bessie was not a persistently deceitful girl. She sometimes did naughty things and let them blow over, as people say, but they always troubled her and made her much more conscientious while they were in her mind. And the pretty lawn dress that she put on every afternoon kept it all fresh. She was very glad she had succeeded in repairing it, and there was no real harm done anywhere, only she had not been trusty, nor truthful, nor kind to Freddie. It wasn't at all likely any of it would come to light, but she wished it never had happened. The next Saturday Dick came over, and on Monday morning he took her home. School was to begin, so she could only kiss her mother and the children and run away, but her mother had looked up her books in her lunchbox. That afternoon she said to Bessie, "Did you see anything of a handsome piece of thread lace, Bessie, that I have been wearing in my silk dress? I did it up the very day I went to Grandmother's and laid it in the top of my drawer. I was in a hurry, and so did not stop to put it in my lace box." "No," said Bessie slowly. "You did not go to the drawer for anything?" I am sure I did not. Well, it is strange. I would not care so much, but it was expensive, and that for my sleeves matched. Still, I may have mislaid it. Bessie felt warm and confused. She remembered now that Carrie Lanham had been accused at school of being light-fingered. She had lingered in the rooms after Bessie came down, and said she had been looking out of every window. Of course she had broken Dick's beautiful cologne bottle, but she surely could not have had the face to steal. That was just it. Oh, if she only had not asked her to come! Her mother had often said, "I would so much rather have you ask girls in when I am home than when I am out, Bessie." But the little girl had been so intent upon suiting herself those few days. She asked Carrie Lanham at recess next morning in a rather confused and delicate manner, to be sure, but Carrie was very indignant and denied up and down, as the children say. "But you did break Dick's cologne bottle," Bessie exclaimed decisively. "No one else was in the room, and you came down drenched with cologne." "It's no such thing. You are the meanest girl I ever heard of, Bessie Collins. I would not be hired to step in your house again, and I won't speak to you this whole term. You see if I do." Bessie went to her seat and dropped a few quiet tears over her book. Her mother knew best, of course. She thought her so strict, so almost queer at times, and yet it was wisest, no doubt. Her judgment had not brought about very good results, she had to confess. If she only could have found her mother's beautiful lace, but it never came to light. "Have you read the book I gave you?" Dick asked one evening when they were in the kitchen making candy. "But of course you have, and it's just splendid, isn't it?" Bessie's eyes drooped and her brow flushed, for her cheeks were red as roses before. No, I haven't," she answered with much confusion. "Why?" And Dick's bright face was full of disappointment. "Didn't you like to have it, or had you read it before?" "Neither, and I was glad, only I did not deserve it, and I'm waiting." There Bessie broke down into a good cry. "You foolish little girl! It is all about that broken bottle. I was cross at first with you, but I felt sorry, and you were so good—" "No, I wasn't," Bessie interrupted. "I wish you would let me tell you all, Dick, and maybe you had better take the book until some time when I am better." Dick looked up in astonishment. Was Bessie the author of the mischief, and had she told a falsehood? "Well," Dick answered. So Bessie related her first morning's temptation, and how she had taken out the bureau drawers to get the hidden story. "Mother told me to lock up any books I might have lying around. I would not have thought it of you, Bess, but oh, don't cry, it wasn't so very bad. And you did not tell any story." "Yes, I told one to Freddie to account for having the drawer out, and acted one when you found your clothes so different, for somehow, when you begin—" "Ah, Bessie, it is well to learn about the tangled web early in life, if so be that it brings wisdom." "Oh, Bessie, how lucky the bottle did not break. The one in the drawer, I mean. It had nitric acid in it. I was taking out a wart with it, and it would have eaten everything to pieces wherever it dropped. It wasn't a nice thing to do, to be sure, but I know you are sorry, and I don't believe you ever would do it again. You see, you are so fond of reading, and Mother doesn't think it right to waste so much time. That is why I lock up my books." "But you never need again, Dick, and I was punishing myself because I did want to read the book so much." "You are a brave little girl after all. Now we will make up splendid, good friends, and shake hands. You are never to touch anything in my room that you think Mother or I would not like you to have, and I will not need to put things out of sight. There, I'll trust you until you tell me that you have broken your word, which I hope will never be. And now I want you to begin Little Women just as soon as you have leisure." With that, they kissed each other and went on with the candy making, Bessie feeling quite light of heart. The candy was a success, too, and Bessie ran out of doors a few minutes to cool her burning eyes before she went into the next room, where her mother sat sewing while her father read his paper. They ate all the candy they wanted and left some for the children who were in bed. End of Chapter 3. Read by Elsie Selwyn. Chapter 4 of How Bessie Kept House by Amanda Minnie Douglas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Elsie Selwyn. Chapter 4. Bessie's Higher Housekeeping. The next day, Cousin Jane sent word that she was coming over for a visit, and when Bessie came home from school, there she found her in her favorite window, her pincushion, her box of spools and odds and ends, and her scissors lying on the windowsill, her patchwork bag hung on one corner of the chair, and her knitting bag on the other, Right in front of her lay a pile of calico, and on the lapboard she was sorting and doing up. "There, Bessie," she began as soon as she had answered the child's greeting. "I've been cutting up the bundles of pieces, and here are half enough blocks for a new quilt. I am so sorry I did not come over in vacation, for you might have sewed it instead of cantering all over as girls do nowadays. Why, when I was 12 years old, I had 4 bed quilts of my own pieced, and had knit my own stockings for I can't tell how long. I never went to school a day after that." Mrs. Collins glanced up to catch Bessie's eye and quietly entreat her not to answer her back sharply. But Bessie only said with a little laugh, "Girls are not so smart nowadays, Cousin Jane." "That's true enough, but you might improve your time. There's so many to keep at you that I'm sure you have no excuse, and your mother was brought up in the old-fashioned way. Lottie, let those things alone. Now, I hope you are not going to waste this whole afternoon, Bessie." "Oh, no, indeed. I have stacks of lessons to learn. I go up in Mother's room where it is quiet for that." And putting away her lunchbox, she left the room while Cousin Jane was descanting on the folly of studying so many things and wasting so much time. That evening, Bessie brought out her stockings. Dick was making ready to crack some butternuts, and a plate of rosy apples stood on the table. "There now, Elizabeth," said Cousin Jane. "I would have darned those stockings this afternoon if you had given them to me." "Bessie takes a certain share in the household work," replied her mother, "and I like to have her do it unless something especial prevents." Cousin Jane looked them over to see if Bessie did them well, but she could find no fault. Afterward, Bessie brought out a tidy she was crocheting, but as this did not, in the other lady's estimation, come under the head of strictly useful and necessary things, there was a small lecture which Bessie took very sweetly. "Bessie," her mother said the following morning, "Mrs. Strong and her sisters are coming to tea tonight, and I sent word for them to bring Addie. Come home as soon as you can." "How good of you, Mother!" And Bessie clasped her arms fondly around her mother's neck. "Elizabeth, I am afraid you are spoiling that child. They see enough of girls at school and everywhere, and this having company makes them too much like big folks. It isn't a good plan, and you'll find it so in the end." Bessie flushed and wanted very much to answer, but met her mother's entreating eyes and smiled instead. She and Addie and Dick had a splendid time that evening out in the kitchen, popping corn and laughing, though Cousin Jane laid every little inattention that occurred for the next 3 days to the fact of having so much company. But presently the visit came to an end, though Bessie gratified Cousin Jane by sewing 2 evenings on the patchwork and promising to persevere until it was finished. "I think my little daughter deserves much credit for being so pleasant and good-tempered," Mrs. Collins said the next afternoon when they were alone. "Cousin Jane is trying, but she means well, and her spectacles are not of the modern sort, so we must excuse her." "Mamma, how much you have praised me lately!" "Bessie, how good and thoughtful you have been lately," her mother said in almost the same tone, at which they both laughed, "ever since you were at your grandmother's." "It wasn't that," Bessie returned, flushing. "Was it your experience at housekeeping, then?" "Yes, Mamma, it was, though I wasn't half as good as you all thought, and it was dreadful." "Dick nor your father never made any complaints, and I found the house in pretty good order, excepting that you almost burnt up one of my baking tins." "I was going to scour it, but I forgot. That was not the worst, though." "Don't you want to tell me all about it?" her mother asked in a soft, coaxing tone, "though I cannot think it was very bad, or I should have made some discoveries before this." "I would like to, Mamma, for I am quite sure that I should never do any of the things again. I used to think it would be so nice to have my way, and it did not seem necessary to work all the time, and—" "You thought you were wiser than I. No uncommon thing for a little girl. I believe I was once troubled with the same complaint myself. But now for the story. After I was out of the house, you—" Bessie took it up and went on bravely, though her cheeks were crimson and the tears came to her eyes. She couldn't see how she had ever been so deceitful and untrustworthy. Perhaps her mother was a little astonished too, but she saw how genuine Bessie's sorrow was, and understood how patiently she had worked out her own amendment, so she drew her to her bosom and kissed her tenderly. "There are a good many just such hard lessons for us to learn through life," she said kindly. "Older people are wiser because they have had more experience and have learned the result of wrongdoing. So they try to warn their children, you see. I do not wish to deny you any indulgence, Bessie, that it would be better for you to have. unless it comes at a time to interfere with necessary work. I give up many pleasures for my children's sake, and try to ask them to give up only a few for mine. And since we are not rich, we must all help each other, which will make the work light. Besides, I want to guard you against selfishness and all its attendant evils. But I think you have learned your lesson pretty well. Like Dick, I shall not feel afraid to trust you again. If you could only have your pretty lace back, oh, Mamma, how can anybody— One sin waits upon another. And now, little daughter, we will see how much we can help one another in the future, and you must believe that I am always thinking and planning for your best. I am sure I shall, forever and ever, Mamma. And she kissed her with warmth and sincerity. I think you have learned little about the higher housekeeping, Mamma continued softly. Keep thy heart. End of Chapter 4. Read by Elsie Selwyn. End of How Bessie Kept House by Amanda Minnie Douglas.